What a year it has been. I tell you what, there are so many incredible stories that we can tell, and we're going to try to tell over the next 7 weeks about this Engage series. So, a year ago, I should say, we started this series called Engage, and the idea was we needed to do two things. One is we wanted to ask people in our church to commit to living in relationship intentionally with people who do not know Jesus Christ. You see, what often happens is in our church settings, in our faith, what we happen to do in the Midwest is often we come to faith in Jesus Christ, and then we leave our friends behind. And we go, that was the old, this is the new. But the reality is God's called us to live in relationship with people who do not know Jesus, to be able to be a testimony of his grace and to be able to offer the hope that we found in him. And so we set out in this Engage series and said that's commitment number one. But commitment number two is we have some needs around this facility, and I wish you could see from my vantage point today, it's harder to find a seat in here today than it has been in the past, and it's an exciting time to be here. Here's a little statistic we uncovered as we did some data looking over the last month or so. You realize, I'm guessing you don't, but 32% of our church attendance, people who call Walk EMC home, 32% is 12th grade and under. Isn't that awesome? It's an awesome problem. And so what we did is we realized we are quickly outgrowing space for children's ministry, and they're our future. And so that started a renovation of our building that needed to be done. And you've seen the cafe area that has been opened up. And now we are right now unfolding below us here a whole Kidmin wing that's exciting. I can't wait for you to see it. The experience that we've had working with our Yoder right now and everybody else has been incredible. And so we can't wait to unveil that, hopefully sometime around Easter. And so we've been in this capital campaign, and I can't wait to share with you how God's been working in that. But today what I want to do is I want to revisit the first of those commitments, which was living intentionally in relationship with people who do not know Jesus Christ. Life transformation was and is and remains the main focus, the primary focus of this Engage initiative. It's about changed lives. It's about transformation. And we asked the question, what would happen if 50% of our congregation said, I will intentionally live in relationship with people who do not know Jesus? What would happen? What would happen? And reality is, They didn't have a whole lot of option. There was no place to complain about unfair taxes. You just had to deal with it. So obviously, the Jewish people really disliked tax collectors and avoided them at all cost. Now, in the Jewish text, the Talmud and the Mishnah, tax collectors were considered robbers. That's what they say. They actually just call it out. They don't call them tax collectors. They just call them robbers. These robbers. Declaring them to be unclean, to be dishonest, to be unfit to participate in religious or legal proceedings. Anyone doing this job would be seen as low-life, criminal, or a loser. And that, you get the picture? Tax collectors, very, very much unliked. But I want you to watch what happens. Matthew chapter 9, verse 9. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at a tax collector's booth. "Follow me, be my disciple," Jesus said to him. So Matthew got up and followed him. All right, time out. Let's think about this for a second. Can you imagine how shocking it would have been for the people when Jesus chose Matthew, a tax collector, to be one of his disciples? I want you to imagine Billy Graham back in the day coming to Al Capone and saying, "Al, I really like you, Al. I think you ought to hang out with us. You know what? Be one of my followers." Imagine our church hiring a very disreputable person to be our next staff member. How would you respond? How would you respond? I mean, honestly, you would email me, because that's what we do. You would email me and you would say, "What are you thinking? Why? Why would you do this?" You'd be shocked. For some, you'd say, "I'm better than that person. Are you kidding me? Why not me?" Being mad that they got picked ahead of me. Of all the people that Jesus could have possibly chosen to be a disciple, how in the world did Matthew make the cut? Here are a few thoughts. When Jesus saw Matthew, he didn't only see a wealthy tax collector. He saw beyond his profession to a person with the potential for deep faith and commitment. Jesus saw the tax collector side of him, but he also saw beyond that and saw what he could become. When Jesus saw Matthew, he didn't only see a person who would be regularly dismissed. He saw a teachable spirit, and he saw a potential to become a significant figure in spreading the gospel throughout the region. So Matthew leaves everything behind. It says Matthew got up and followed him. It's a massive change. You talk about doing a 180, that is a massive change. The story reminds me that any of us are capable of being used for God's purpose if we are ready and willing to abandon our former lives to follow with all our hearts. Do you agree with me? Fast forward. Matthew's faithfulness ultimately leads to him dying as a martyr for the faith in Christ in Ethiopia. You know, when we often think of Matthew, we think about him leaving everything behind to follow Jesus. But that's actually not quite accurate. Okay, we often hear about him just leaving it all and walking away and following Jesus. But I want to tell you today, that's not actually quite accurate. And that's not accurate because Matthew still had friends who, like him, were considered outcasts and despised sinners in their community. And he did not leave them behind. Matthew chapter 9, verse 10, it says this: "Later, Matthew invited Jesus and his disciples to his home as dinner guests, along with many tax collectors and other disreputable sinners." Now, according to Matthew, and according to Mark, and according to Luke, they all tell us that the follow-up to Matthew's encounter with Jesus was to invite many, and I underlined in my notes, many of his friends, his tax collector friends, other disreputable sinners, to have Jesus meet them at a party. He's like, you guys got to meet Jesus. So Matthew didn't just say to his friends, "Listen, I've had a change in my life. I'm just going to leave you all behind. I'm walking a different path now." No, what he didn't leave behind was his friends. He said, Jesus, would you meet with my friends? And they throw a party full of Matthew's despised, outcasted friends. Can we just park here for just a second? Matthew wanted his friends to meet the person that he was willing to give up everything to follow. You got to meet this guy. You got to meet this one who changed my life. I like as the story goes on, verse 11. But when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with such, look at the word, scum? Well, that's degrading, isn't it? Why does your teacher eat with such scum? When Jesus heard this, he said, healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do. Then he added, now go and learn the meaning of the scripture. I want you to show mercy, not offer sacrifices. For I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners. Shocker. This dinner party that Jesus threw drew criticism from a group that was uninvited, and those uninvited people were the religious people of the day. I love Jesus' response to the religious leaders who were looking for something to criticize. He says to them, hey, listen, healthy people don't need the doctor. Sick people do. Jesus' mission was focused not on the self-declared righteous people, but on those who were aware of their sin, were aware of the failures. They were well aware of the struggles in their life. And Jesus focused much of his ministry on those people. This concept was completely lost on the religious leaders of the day and on far too many religious people of this day as well, who fail to see the necessity of Jesus' presence among those who they deemed unworthy, and oftentimes our culture today does as well. I want to do something a little different today. I'm going to invite Brant to join me on the stage. Brant is not just my teammate, Brant is my friend. And so Brant is going to come, and what we decided to do was not just talk about the story of Matthew, but talk about what it is to be a one, to have a one in our life. And that is the story of Brant. And so Brant, let's have a seat. Let's have a conversation today. And this is a challenge, to be quite honest. I think it's okay to be vulnerable. This is not an easy story for you to tell, is it?
No, first off, I want to ask you, though, did you get a bunch of emails when you hired me?
Let's keep moving forward.
No, this is, it's not an easy season, I guess I would say, to share my story. Being that February, which is the month we just came off of, was the month that, one, it's my mom's birthday, but also it's the month that my dad passed away. And so both of them are not with us anymore today. And so it's a heavy season. And when I was asked to share my story, I relived a lot of the things that I grew up experiencing. And so it's been a tough few days, I'll say that.
Yeah. Take a second here, and it looks like your screen's froze. You want to just use mine?
I can. EB.
I tell you what, you trust Dustin's technology, and look what happens.
We'll find it out. Yep, we'll figure it out. Yeah, let me introduce myself. So my name is Brant, for those of you who don't know me. The beautiful woman in this picture is Francie, and she's my wife going on 11 years now. And those are our three boys. Hutch is 7 years old. He's the oldest next to Francie there. Archer, who's pinned up against my face, is 5 years old, and then Logan is in there in the middle. And let me just say this is a great picture, and Lindsay Raymer's here today. She's the one who took this picture. Bless her heart, she rode with us up to Benton Harbor, Michigan, and back for this session. And I heard a pastor once say, thank you, Chris, I heard a pastor once say, there's no such thing as a perfect family, and we are the poster family for that. And while this picture looks good, like many pictures you see on Instagram or Facebook, on the way home, I remember asking Lindsay, did you get one good picture? And she's like, yeah, I think I got, 30 or so. And I was like, well, how many did you take? And she's like, 500. And so I'll just say that this is 1 out of 500 that we all were looking at the camera and smiling. And so, yeah, there is no such thing as a perfect family, and that's true of us as well.
From a photographer standpoint, you can always tell what reality is. You have death grip on your children.
Yeah.
You will stand here, you will smile, quick.
I don't think Archer's smiling as much as he is gritting his teeth there.
Yeah, I love it. So talk to us. Let's go back in your story a little bit. Talk to us a little bit about your upbringing.
Yeah. So in just a second, you'll see a different picture up on the screen, and these are my parents. My mom, Connie, and my dad, Kim. I get asked a lot of times, how are you related to the police officer in Napanee? That was not my father, that was my uncle, whom I was named after. And so many people know Butch Nine. His name was Brant as well. They called him Butch, as well as they called me that growing up too. Not my favorite thing. But anyway, yeah, my dad was his brother, and so that's who those beautiful people on the screen are. Let me just explain them a little bit. My mom was a Wisconsin dairy farmer. They moved to Indiana, Osceola area when she was almost a teenager, I believe so. My dad he lived back and forth between Indiana and California. And they both were married before meeting each other. They both had kids in previous marriages. But one thing that I know about my parents is that they were extremely hardworking. Many of you might recognize my mom. I don't think that there is an apartment complex or a mobile home complex in our community that she did not manage. And my dad worked for the street department for Napanee for about 30 years. And so they were hardworking individuals. And they were dedicated people. Let me explain them a little further. My mom's parents, I never knew any of my grandparents, but my mom's parents were 25 years apart in age. And so my grandma would have been in her 20s and my grandpa in his 50s when they met. And that marriage was, a lot of it was abusive. And so my mom experienced a lot of that growing up. My dad's parents, some of you might know this story if you've been around the area for a while, but my dad's parents, to kind of sum up their relationship, was rooted in adultery. And my dad was a little boy. His dad came home and saw the adultery that was happening and ended up taking the life of that man as well as his own in front of my dad. And so that's kind of the baggage that came into that relationship, which is ultimately my bloodline.
You have siblings. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about your siblings.
So you'll see us up on the screen there. My brother Kelly is 22 years older than I am. And some of you might know him. His last name is Moore. But Kelly, he felt more like an uncle to me than a brother until I grew up a little bit. But he always was very intentional with me, invested in me a lot when I was a little boy. And then you see Ashley there. She's the one with curly black hair. She's 7 years older than I am. And she was kind of a second mom to me in a lot of ways when I was younger. And then Kimmy is 4 years older than me. She's married to Brant Arrett. For some reason, she decided she wasn't yelling at Brant, and so she married a Brant. And Brant, he owns and runs the funeral home across the street, as well as the Arrett Funeral Home in Goshen. Kimmy's the only one whom I share the same mom and dad with. And so you can see in that picture, I'm holding up the number 1. They have deemed me the golden child, and I gladly take that title.
When you look over your childhood, what kind of defining moments come back?
So really, I want to preface it with this. My story is not shaped by tragedy. It's not rooted in tragedy. It's more shaped in struggle. And so it's relatable, I think, to a lot of you all. There are people in this room who have experienced tragedy. I have not in that way, but I have experienced struggle. And so that's really my story. There's 2 defining moments that I can look back on my childhood. They both involve my dad. And the first one, and I've told this story a number of times to different people. My dad was working out in the garage, and I went up to him and asked him, "Hey, Dad, will you play catch with me with football?" And he was busy. He didn't really want to, but reluctantly he said, "Yes, I'll play catch with you. But if you drop the ball, I'm done playing. And so the first few throws, and again, just for context, I was probably 6 or 7. First few throws were reasonable, and I caught them pretty easily. Then they got a little bit harder, and I could tell Dad was done playing. And ultimately, he threw the ball too hard, and it was too difficult for any 6 or 7-year-old to manage. And I dropped the ball and went to pick it up. And when I looked up, my dad was already walking away back to the garage to do the chore that he was working on. And I tell that story, it's a pretty simple story and maybe seems meaningless to you all, but I tell that story because it's very symbolic of the way I felt with my dad for the many years after that, just this feeling of abandonment. The second story, which also involves him, was the year 2000, so it had been a couple years after that. I was 8 or 9 years old. And I always tell people Northwood was gearing up for another state championship run. If you're from this community, you know that football is kind of a big deal. And me and my sisters and my mom were getting around for the football game. It's a Friday night. And I think my sisters were taking forever. I was done and ready because I'm, the golden child. And I remember I was sitting in my dad's Lazy Boy, and I don't think he was planning to come with us that evening. And he walked back to sit down and watch the TV, and I don't know if golf was on or something, and I sprang up impulsively like most 7, 8-year-old boys are, and tickled him, and he was not in the mood to play. And what he chose to do in that moment was to kick me out of the way. And let me preface it this way. He was not in any way, shape, or form an abusive parent. Maybe emotionally and verbally at times, but not physically. But in that moment, in his rage, he decided to kick me out of the way, and I'm sure there was other things going on that I was unaware of at the time. That caused an eruption in our neighborhood that probably was heard blocks away. My mom came unglued, and again, when I say that there was other underlying things happening, her reaction kind of points to that. She began screaming at him. My sister Ashley, who was probably 14, 15 years old, came into the house, started screaming at my dad, and my sister Kimmy came downstairs and started giving him an earful as well. And before I knew it, my mom was telling him to get out. And I didn't really know what that meant. I was, 8 years old. And but we packed up. The next thing I remember, we're packing up, and we went to the football game. And when we got back, the house just seemed emptier. And I remember running into their room and opening up the closet and seeing that my dad's stuff was just gone. And my mom and my sisters seemed relieved in a lot of ways. But as an 8-year-old who was the instigator of that moment, I felt like it was all my fault. So yeah, those are some defining moments of my childhood, but I like to look back and reflect on that moment and imagine as if Jesus was always near even before I recognized him. And I say this, I like to write a lot, and I've written some blogs related to this story, but I like to imagine that when I dropped the ball, Jesus picked it up. And when I felt abandoned, that he stood beside me. So yeah, those are defining moments of my childhood.
I've listened to you speak about your mom and the impact that she's had on your life.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit more about your mom.
Yeah. She was a wonderful woman. You're gonna have to hit me or something and get me out of this.
You're doing just fine.
I'd like to start with the divorce and kind of go from there. And so Dad left, and Mom had 3 kids at home. I would have been 8, Kimmy would have been 12, Ashley, I think 15 at the time. Kelly was moved out because, reminder, he's 22 years older than me. He had a life of his own. And she had, at the time, I think she was catering for Del Mar, and many of you might remember the old Coach's Cash Station in Napanee. She managed that too, and so those were her 2 jobs, if I can remember correctly. And she couldn't support all three of us and our home at that time. And so we were essentially on our way to being homeless. And I remember her crying and saying, "I just want to run away." And little Brant was telling her, "Please don't. We need you." And I was confused. And to make things more confusing, I remember Ashley's dad, so Ashley also has a different dad than I do, came into the picture at this time. And I don't know, and I'm going to be respectful of her story. I don't know all of those details, but you can imagine being Ashley at this moment. My father leaves us, and now her father, who for whatever reason wasn't in the picture, is now back in the picture. And he helped us find a place to stay. And the people who let us live in one of their homes was Virgil and Sarah Miller. And some of you may know them, but they had a house on the Lake of the Woods in Bremen. They also had a little cottage next to that. And so we were able to stay in that little cottage for a couple of months while Mom tried to get her feet under her. And during that time, there was a boy that lived right next door. His name was Matt. And, you know, we were going through a lot of change, obviously, but Matt's present in my life. He was 16 years old, and his kindness showed me that God works through ordinary people's compassion. And he just spent time with me. I needed him, and God knew I needed him in that moment. So we lived in this little lake cottage, and it felt like it just kept raining. It like when it rains, it pours. And I remember the first time I saw Grace, and that was when my sister Ashley came home, and she told my mom at the age of 15, 16 years old that she was pregnant. And so while we were barely getting by, living in somebody else's home, my sister felt super abandoned by two fathers at this point. And she came home and told my mom this. And my mom, her response was just beautiful. It was not abrupt and abrasive as much as it was compassionate and grace-filled. And I remember thinking in that moment that something was different about my mom. And I didn't know what it was, because she couldn't have done that on her own power. What I've learned looking back at that moment is that grace isn't just big dramatic moments. It's in the daily perseverance and kindness that grace shows up, and my mom displayed that beautifully.
So you guys were living out at the Lake of the Woods, but then ultimately you make a move to Wakarusa.
Yeah. Well, in the span of when I was 8 years old until I was 18, right before college, we moved 8 times. And so that's once every 1.5 years. So we were, Mom's friends used to call us gypsies. We just kept moving from place to place. And one of those moves, we wound up in Wakarusa. And ironically enough, we rented a home from Rich Whitmer. And so just there on Elkhart Street, that's where we wound up. And our neighbors were Kevin and Deb Anthony, and they had a son named Mitch. And Mitch and I were in the same class. We were in 7th grade at this point, and he invited me to come to church. There was a hayride at NMC and invited me to come. And I asked him if girls would be there. He assured me they would. And so I said, yeah, sure. And I ended up going on that hayride, and they dropped us off at a barn to hear a special speaker, and sitting on bales of straw. I felt like I was the only one in the room. And that's the day that I committed my life to Christ. My heart was broken, and I saw my family through a new lens, and committed my life to him at that moment.
So you've now accepted Jesus as your Savior, you're committed to following your life after Jesus. But it didn't just really stop there. And you didn't, what I sense in your stories, you didn't just simply say, woo, all right, that's it, I'm done. Yeah. Tell us more about that. What happened next?
So we talk about the discipleship wheel here at Walk EMC. If you've been through our discipleship class, you've surely talked about this quite often. But we talk about it in a phase of you're spiritually dead, and then you're a spiritual infant, and then you grow up just like you physically do to a child, a young adult, an adult, and adults we all know reproduce, right? And so that's why when we say we are making disciples who make disciples who make disciples, the goal is that we as disciples of Jesus would make other disciples. We would reproduce. You're looking at the poster child for spiritual infancy right here. And I kind of lived in this world of spiritual infancy from the moment I said I want Christ in my life until about my junior year of college. And so many people who knew me in that gap, and there's some of you who are in this room who knew me in that gap, would say that you know 2 or 3 different versions of Brant 9, and that would be true as I was wrestling with what it looks like to follow Christ and have a true relationship with Him. I wasn't necessarily growing. I was stuck in this spiritual infancy for quite a long time. I like to point back to Jeremiah 2:13, where it references drawing from broken cisterns instead of living water. That was kind of a theme from that 7th, 8th grade year until my junior year of college.
Throughout this Engage series, I already set it up today. We've been talking about having a one in our lives, somebody who we are intentionally living in relationship with, who doesn't know or is not any longer practicing the faith. And so we've been asking about ones. You had some people in your life step up and see that they could invest in you. This is a big transforming moment in your life as I look back on your story. Tell us a little bit about what it was to be somebody's one.
Yeah, let me see if I can do this in a timely manner. So you'll see some individuals up on the screen, and really from that 7th grade year until my junior year of college, these were the people who were intentionally investing in my life. That first picture there, if you're looking on the left side, is a man by the name of Neil Yoder. And he was a dentist here in Wakarusa for a number of years, and many of you might know him. Neil decided to say yes to being a small group leader for a bunch of middle school boys, bless his heart. And here's one thing about Neil. He wasn't like super cool. He didn't bring us all the treats in the world. Like he wasn't promising to, take us out on his boat or anything like that. Neil was something that I had yet to experience in a man, and that was consistency. He was there every single week, and most of my friends did not show up. And so this is just a beautiful moment where God just really gave me a gift here. Neil and I would meet individually in that small group room on a weekly basis for 3 years. And that man listened to me, cried with me, taught me how to pray, told me when I was being immature. Such a blessing. That second picture there is a woman that many of you know. Her name was Lisa Loniger. And Lisa invested in me. I don't know how I ended up at Jeff and Lisa's house so much, but I was there all the time with their 2 daughters and some other friends, and they just invested in me, poured into me, fed me, showed me love and consistency as well. And Lisa, bless her heart, ultimately brought my mom to the Lord. So that person in the middle is Todd Gongwer. He was my small group leader my junior year of high school, and I didn't go home after small group most of the time. I just stayed with Todd and his family at his house, and he was just intentional beyond belief with me. He would call me up some weekends, and we'd go do other things. He trusted me to babysit his kids. I don't know why. But still somebody that invests in me far more than he was required to, being a small group leader. As I got into college, Corey Lance became somebody that I learned from and admired and wanted to be a lot like. And if you don't know Corey, he started a ministry. He and his wife started a ministry up in South Bend called Transformation Ministries, and they're doing wonderful things up there. But Corey let me tag along in a lot of ways to the things that they were doing. I lived in Keller Park, where their ministry was kind of birthed out of for a year alongside Corey and Allie, and did ministry there with them for that year. And so that was such a blessing, and he really, again, led by example, and I learned a lot from him. And that last person that you'll see up there is Derry Prinkert, who many of you know. He was my high school pastor. Bless his heart. Had to deal with the ups and downs of me and trying to figure out what this faith is. And that next slide there is a picture of me being baptized by Derry. Terry Bly's in that picture as well. But that was a big moment for me. I got to go on a lot of trips and grow a lot during my high school years because of Derry's leadership. And so that's me in high school, dedicating my life in front of my friends and family to the Lord.
So you said something, and it's written in our notes that I want to make sure that people gather. When they look at those 5 people on the screen, plus other people, you said to me, these are imperfect people like you and me. They were just willing to be intentional and sacrifice something a little more precious than money, and that was time. And I think that's critical. Sometimes we think we have to have all things in our life clicking on all cylinders and get to a point where we're living a perfect follower of Jesus' life before we can invest in people. And I like that you said these are imperfect people who just chose to invest their time.
Yep, and really where my growth started happening as I took everything I learned from those individuals and those years of spiritual infancy and really the sanctification that Christ was doing in me. And it really all boiled down to this moment of my junior year of college, and I met my wife. And really the missing piece of the puzzle is her family and what that brought to my life. And if you throw that picture up there, this was something I had not yet learned, and that was relearning family dynamics that were biblical in a lot of ways. And so that's from a couple of years ago. There's 1 or 2 more grandkids that aren't represented in that picture, but that is my wife's family. And in that relationship with her, I saw a mom and a dad at home. Eating around the dinner table together. Guys, I had no dinner etiquette. The first dinner I had with them, I ate a whole loaf of bread, and I'm not kidding you. I ate the whole loaf because of the strawberry jam that her mom just got done canning. And no self-control.
No judgment here, man. No judgment.
Praying before meals, serving together as a family vacations, and having grandparents and extended family relationships. Everything just seemed rooted in Christ, and I gained that with Francie. Probably one of the biggest gifts of my life, and that was kind of the missing puzzle piece in a lot of ways. It allowed me to turn my attention off of myself and my needs and start to realize that I have a responsibility to pay it forward.
So you started to pay it forward in some unique ways. You were a teacher, and you had opportunities to coach along the way as well. Look at that.
You recognize anybody in that picture?
I do. I know number 24 pretty well. Yep. That's our daughter.
Yeah, so I got to coach for a number of years in the Wani district. My hair looked different. That's before the receding hairline started.
I see that.
Now I stick with the comb over. I'm not yet to your style.
Yeah, it's coming. Not far, though. Not far.
But that was that's a super amazing moment in my life, is being able to coach, and then that next slide there, being able to teach. First off, let me point out that I am Judge 9 in that picture, and I miss those moments. We should bring back Judge 9 and staff. That'd be good.
Nah, I don't know.
But that other picture there, I want to park there for just a second, is me in the same exact spot 27 years apart. That's me when I was in kindergarten, and then me when I was teaching. I think that's my 8th or 9th year teaching. And really the significance of that time is that my whole approach to teaching was missional. And that little boy that's in that kindergarten picture smelled like smoke, had a dysfunctional family at home, and really just wanted some stability. And then that man right next to him got the opportunity to minister to and teach a bunch of kids who smelled like smoke, had dysfunctional families, and just really needed some stability. And so it was one of the highest honors to be able to do that for 9 years. Um, you know, in 2019, I was still teaching, and that was a tough year. I went back to get my master's degree. We were pregnant with our second son, and like was alluded to earlier, my parents passed away. And my dad had been battling colon cancer, and he lost that battle in February of 2019, 6 years ago. And then 4 months later, my mom passed away from a stroke, and that was totally unexpected, and it rocked our world. So that year was a lot of, had a lot of tragedy in it, a lot of suffering for our family. The last 5 years with my dad were beautiful, and I want to make sure that I don't leave this out. We moved 2 blocks away from my dad when we bought our first house, and he was the best dad, and the best grandpa that you could ask for. He was intentional. He invested in me in ways that he never had before. We had real conversations. He and my mom actually got along, bless their hearts, enough to take a family picture with us. And so I do want to make sure that I recognize that he did change, and he was a good man. I decided to go back and get my administration degree. I was beginning to have this passion of leading other people and leading other adults who would lead in different capacities. But at the same time, I was struggling with an opposite feeling of needing to be poured into. I had spent 9 years pouring into so many people, kids, that I was at a point now where I needed to be poured back into. And so Francie and I began praying, what does that look like? How do you go into an administrative degree and also get poured into? And we didn't know. And so many doors that should have been open for principal jobs in the school systems closed, and so many opened that shouldn't have been open, that we didn't feel comfortable with. And we just didn't know what was happening, and we just cried out to God, probably the most heartfelt, intentional prayers that we had prayed up to that point. And in October of 2022, I was hired at Walk EMC to fill the role of executive pastor. Here's the beautiful thing about that. Our prayers were answered well beyond what we could have imagined. I get to be in a leadership role, which I felt God was calling me to, but I get to be poured into by so many different people consistently. I needed mentors in my life, and I prayed specifically for them. And I get emotional when talking about this because I gained Chris Knight and Denny Yoder, y'all, and others too who have just been so intentional with me and modeled Christ-like leadership in so many ways. And so that is a beautiful accumulation of what happened. And then ultimately, you know, we talk about being a one. What is a one? I was a one. That's my story. I came from a broken, smelly, messed up family. And I'm ultimately getting to share good news, the good news of Christ, and minister to people in just such a beautiful way. I was a one, and if those 5 individuals didn't take advantage and take time and intentionality with me, who knows where I would have been. I was not getting that direction at home. I needed somebody else, and they filled the gap. And now I have a responsibility. I have 3 boys, and I get to pass down a legacy that wasn't passed down to me by my parents, but it was by other people. And there's other people in my life that I get to live intentionally with, and I know there's people in your lives as well.
I'm going to ask you to do something that we didn't talk about. On the seats, there's a card. How important is that to you?
You know, from my perspective, if you're not willing to think of at least one person, because the reality is there's multiple ones in your life. But if you're not willing to at least pick one person in your life to live intentionally with, to pray for, and to just go through life with, then you're not a spiritual parent. You're not willing to be a disciple who makes a disciple, And so it's time to get in the game. And maybe you have committed to a one, and maybe this is time to recommit. And maybe you haven't committed to a one, and this is time for you to reflect and think about who that person is.
So here's what we're going to do. We know we're into overtime. I'm going to ask you to do something. I think, first of all, would you say thanks to Brant? That's... It takes quite a bit of vulnerability to be able to share that, and I just want to say thanks because I think that was really helpful. But what I'm going to ask you to do is take serious that card that's on your chair. Over the last year, we've been asking people to commit to having a one, and I'll tell you what, there's some really cool stories that have come out of those relationships. But like Brant said, either maybe it's time to re-engage that one, or maybe it's time to re-up and find another person. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to fill out that card. And I'm going to ask the band, they can come on out from hiding in the back. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to stand here in just a minute. They're going to lead us in this last song. But this is my request of you. If you're willing to take somebody and say, they're going to be my one that I'm going to be intentional in living in relationship with, I'm going to ask you to make the commitment and simply right up here on the front of the stage, would you just come during that song and just place it right here as a symbol to just say, God, I'm in the game. Here's my one. And I know some of you might say, I need to take this away and pray about it and think about it. You are welcome to do that as well. But we would love to hear the story of your one. Would you pray?
Let me turn my mic back on. Stand with me. Father, thank you for a beautiful morning to worship and honor and glorify you. Thank you for the story that you've given each one of us. And it might be marked by suffering or tragedy or just struggle. But they're all meaningful stories that we need to tell. Use us, Jesus. I pray for everybody in here who calls themselves a follower of Christ to pick up their cross. Pray that they're obedient to your call to make disciples who make disciples. We love you, Jesus. We pray this in your name. Amen.